theme for this new series of Sanganites is rather enigmatically titled Building on Emptiness. Emptiness. So if you've just joined us, you will remember that from the first 6-week course, that the Dharma tells us that all things are insubstantial, lacking an independent self. All things depend on an almost infinite number of other things and conditions for their existence. All things are created and kept in existence by a whole host of other things and conditions, very complex combinations of things and conditions. All things are constantly being affected by other things. So the boundaries we draw between this thing and that thing are pretty arbitrary, actually. And the Dharma also tells us that all things are impermanent, not just impermanent, radically transient, in a process of constant change. They are nothing but a process of constant change. There are no things, there is only change. And the Dharma tells us that none of these insubstantial, radically transient phenomena we see around us can give us any sort of real, lasting satisfaction, because they are insubstantial and transient. And the pleasures we get from them dissolve and vanish as quickly as the pleasures do in dreams. So you'll remember, if you've just finished that course, that these three qualities of conditioned things are traditionally called the three lakshanas, the three marks of conditioned things. That all conditioned things are insubstantial, lacking in self-nature. All conditioned things are impermanent. And all conditioned things are unsatisfactory as a means of getting any sort of permanent happiness and fulfillment. And in Buddhism, these three marks, these three lakshanas, are often summed up with a single word: shunyata, emptiness. So especially in later Buddhist scriptures, we hear over and over again that all things are by nature empty. All things are by nature void, as we chant in the Heart Sutra. And we too are shunya. We too are empty. We too are transient, constantly changing, lacking any sort of core of independent, fixed self-nature. Now, at first sight, that could sound like a pretty negative viewpoint. Even a very nihilistic viewpoint. If that's how things are, what's the point? What's the point of anything? And it has to be said that many Westerners do interpret Buddhism that way, especially many Western scholars have in the past interpreted Buddhism in that way, as a sort of tradition that says, well, there's not much point to anything, so I'll just sort of vanish or something. Seeing Buddhism as very negative, very life-denying. So surely, if Buddhists see the world that way, Buddhists must be very miserable people. That is only logical, surely. But surprise, surprise. Although some scholars tell us we should be miserable, we don't seem to be. If that is how we see the world, why are actual Buddhists so cheerful? Sometimes annoyingly so. Not cheerful all the time, okay, that would be a bit much to ask this side of enlightenment, but why are so many of us so cheerful so much of the time? Well, maybe there's a clue to why this might be the case in a discourse in the Pali Canon, called the Lesser Discourse on Emptiness. I have to admit, I'm not quite sure whether it's the Lesser Discourse on Emptiness or the Greater Discourse on Emptiness. But I think it's the lesser one, and it's one of the two. Okay, in I think the Lesser Discourse on Emptiness and the Pali Canon. Okay, the Pali Canon, for those of you who don't know, is a collection of stories and teachings from the life of the Buddha in the Pali language that are as close as we can probably get to the actual words he used. They tell us in a lot of down-to-earth detail about the places he went, the people he knew, and the teachings that he gave to those people. And in this Pali Canon, we have this discourse on emptiness. And in this discourse on emptiness, the Buddha talks at length about emptiness. And he tells his friend Ananda, because I dwell in emptiness, I experience abundance. I think the translator could have got the joke across better, actually, if they'd said, because I dwell in emptiness, I experience fullness. But abundance actually is probably better for getting the meaning across. Because I dwell in emptiness, I experience abundance. So apparently, the Buddha is saying that this emptiness of things, which the Buddha is completely in touch with, and which sounds on the face of it so miserable, that this emptiness is in fact the key to abundance. In fact, emptiness is highly positive. So I think we talk a little bit about maybe some of the ways in which emptiness could be positive. In our introductory course, we point out the fact that we are and everything else is impermanent means new things can come into existence. And it means that we can change and grow. New wonderful things can come in and bloom and blossom and flourish. And more wonderful versions of ourselves can come into existence. If it wasn't for this transient nature of things, we'd be stuck as we are. We also point out that this lack of independent self-nature we talk about, this non-self, which could sound so negative, means that we don't exist as isolated, lonely beings. This lack of independent self-nature means we don't exist as isolated, lonely beings in a hostile universe. It means we exist in a connected in a web of relationships with other beings and the world around us. It means we're connected. We're part of something much bigger than ourselves, our own little selves. And that is surely a more positive and exciting way of existing than being cut off, alone, isolated, and unconnected. So yes, we might find it a bit disappointing that if we try to get happiness by arranging the world to our satisfaction, trying to get as much stuff as we can, the right house, the right car, the right phone, the right clothes, the right holidays, the right entertainments, that's not going to work. Not for long. That might be a bit disappointing. But that doesn't mean there is no point to life. And that we should all be really miserable. Because, yes, the world is insubstantial and radically transient. It is dreamlike. But there is, as it were, something behind this dreamlike nature of things, something trying to manifest, trying to break through, and that can only come into existence, something highly positive that can only come into existence, where people can grow and be transformed and aren't stuck in one identity, where people are not isolated, but connected and related to each other and the world, part of each other. There is this, whatever it is, which can only come into existence because of this emptiness. And to the extent that this something deeper, does manifest in our lives, to that extent we can find real fulfillment and happiness, even if we can't get that by owning lots of stuff. So yes, the world is insubstantial and transient. Yes, we are insubstantial and transient. The world is empty. We are empty. But Buddhists do build on that emptiness. That emptiness is not negative, and Buddhists build on it. In fact, Buddhists have been building on emptiness for 2,500 years, which is why we have this place here, not the building, because that was built by Christians, but why we are here, and why we own it. Sorry, I've lost my place now. Emptiness means that anything could happen. Emptiness means there is infinite potential. Emptiness allows us to build something far more wonderful than we could in a world of fixed, isolated beings, fixed, isolated people. So we do build on this emptiness. What do we build? What do we build on this emptiness? We build a better being in ourselves. And we build a better world around ourselves, among ourselves, the sort of world that can allow us to become better beings in ourselves, to grow. And Buddhists sometimes call this sort of world, this sort of environment, a Buddha field. A Buddha field. When I say Buddha field, I mean mainly a field in the sense of a magnetic field, a sort of sphere of influence. I don't mean a sort of muddy patch of land. Although you could grow things in a muddy... Actually, I quite like growing things in muddy patches of land. I like my allotment. But a Buddha field is a sort of sphere of influence. A Buddha field is an environment where beings are under the influence of the Buddha and the Dharma. It's also been called a pure land or a Buddha land. I like pure land. I think of a Buddha land as a sort of branch establishment of my true home, our true home, the place I long for, the place that we all long for. So we have this idea of creating a Buddha field, and Buddhist scriptures often delight in paradoxes. And one rather wonderful Buddhist scripture, the teaching of Vimalakirti, tells us, should one wish to build on empty space, one might go ahead, in spite of the fact that it is not possible to build anything on empty space. In just the same way, a bodhisattva who knows full well that all beings are like empty space might go ahead and build a Buddha field in order to develop living beings, in spite of the fact that it is not possible to build a Buddha field in empty space. Well, sounds a bit like Zen, doesn't it? The sound of one hand clapping or something. But anyway, we build in empty space. We build a bodhisattva may well go ahead and build a Buddha field in empty space in order to develop living beings. A bodhisattva, for those of you who haven't come across the term, is the ideal Buddha. You could say it's the ideal Buddhist practitioner, someone who isn't just practicing the Dharma for their own happiness, but is practicing in order to be of more benefit to all, to be a better being, to be of more benefit to all, in order to make the world a better place. That's what a bodhisattva is. And we hear that a bodhisattva might well create a Buddha field in order to benefit living beings. And in that same discourse, Vimalakirti discourse, we hear the Buddha say, noble sons and daughters, a Buddha field is a field of sentient beings. A bodhisattva creates a Buddha field to the same extent that he causes the development of living beings. A bodhisattva's Buddha field is a field of positive thought. A bodhisattva's Buddha field is a field of the magnificent vision of the spirit of enlightenment. A bodhisattva's Buddha field is a field of generosity. A bodhisattva's Buddha field is a field of ethical behavior. It's a field of meditation. It's a field of wisdom. A bodhisattva's Buddha field is a field of metta, compassion, joy in others' happiness, and an undisturbed mind. Bodhisattva's Buddha field is a field of the four means of unification. I'll come back to that one. But it's a field of positive thought, vision, generosity, ethical behavior, meditation, wisdom, metta, compassion. So according to this teaching, according to the teaching of Vimalakirti, part of the practice of a bodhisattva, this ideal Buddhist practitioner, is to create a Buddha field, to create a pure land around themselves by gathering together and inspiring a community of people, creating a community characterized by generosity, ethical behavior, higher mental states, generosity, wisdom, and metta. Well, creating and holding together a community like that might be a bit much for one ordinary person. So our founder, the founder of the order, Sangharakshita, he has advised order members not to think of ourselves as bodhisattvas. I'm a bodhisattva. That would be quite a thing to set yourself up as. Not to think of ourselves as being bodhisattvas and doing this and creating a community around us, but to think of ourselves as coming together with others, as it were, to create a bodhisattva, as it were. To create a bodhisattva that's much bigger than any of us, and between us, together, to create such a Buddha field, together to gather a community around ourselves, and together to create that sort of dharmic environment in which we and others can grow. And he encourages us to see our centres as doing just that. That's what our centres are about. A focus around which we gather a spiritual community so that we create a Buddha field, create that environment. He talks about creating what he calls mini pure lands in which beings can thrive and develop in the midst of a society that in many ways does not allow people to thrive and develop or acts against it. We may not be able to transform our whole society, but we can start to change things from the bottom up by creating these mini pure lands around our centres, by creating alternative societies around our centres. And that is the overriding vision that governs what we do at this Buddhist centre. We are trying to create a mini pure land, to create a mini Buddha field, an alternative society, if you like, in which we can flourish. And we all depend upon that because we don't exist as separate individuals, we do exist as part of our context. So that's what we're trying to do, and that defines what we are. So we're not a community centre, we're not a sort of centre for alternative things of all sorts, we're not an adult education institute, we are not trying to teach skills that people can take away and use on their own, because they probably won't. We are trying to gather a community. We're trying to create a community ruled by metta, generosity, and wisdom. That's what we're trying to do. And hey, Buddhism being Buddhism, there's a list that tells us how to do it. Yippee! I've already mentioned the 4 means of unification, and that is the list, the 4 means of unification. The 4 ways of gathering and unifying a community. So these 4 means of unification crop up in a story, again in the Pali Canon, about a man called Hataka. And Hataka has obviously been a disciple of the Buddha and got somewhere with being a disciple of the Buddha. And I don't know whether he went back to his hometown or whether the Buddha went off on one of his long jaunts. But basically, Hataka hasn't seen the Buddha for ages. Hataka hasn't seen the Buddha for ages. And then the Buddha and some of his followers turn up in the town where Hataka lives. And the Buddha's a bit surprised, it sounds, to find that Hataka has gathered this huge community of practitioners. He's created this huge sangha around himself. And he says, so the Buddha says to Hataka, "How'd you do it, Hataka? How did you gather this huge community of practitioners around yourself?" And he said, "Well, I did it by doing what you told me. I did it by the 4 means of unification. By the 4 means of unification, Samgrahavastu, which you taught me. When I know that I can make a connection with someone through generosity, I use generosity. When I know that I can make a connection with someone through kind speech, I use kind speech. When I know I can make a connection with someone through beneficial activity, I use beneficial activity. When I know that I can make a connection with someone through exemplification or empathy, I use exemplification or empathy. And the Buddha says, sadhu, sadhu, Hartika. That is just the way to attract and unify a large following. Anyone who's created a large following in the past has done it using these 4 means of unification. Anyone who creates a large Sangha in the future will do so by using these 4 means of unification. So, okay, they are generosity, kindly speech, beneficial activity, and all of those are fairly easily translatable. The last one, samanatata, I'll say a bit more about that, could mean exemplification, literally means sameness, samanatata. Literally means sameness, could mean exemplification, in other words, acting the same as you talk, or it could mean seeing yourself as the same as others, sort of not putting others above yourself. So first of all is generosity. So generosity is the economics of the Buddha land. It's the economics of the Pure Land. We want to get away, the world around us doesn't operate on generosity. It operates on the idea that I'll give you something, but only if you give me something. And that is not particularly a Buddhist way of approaching things. We want to get away from market economics. We're creating a community. Real communities do not work on market economics, which is just an expression of fundamental egotism. We are seeking to create a community, or the idea of dana as the means of creating a community is based on the idea that people want to contribute, based on the desire to contribute, to make a contribution. Different people make their contributions in different ways, but together, our different contributions of all sorts create something among us. This centre thrives on generosity. I mean, it's supported financially by people's generosity. We've got no outside income. There's loads and loads of work goes on, which is all to do with volunteer work. It thrives on generosity in all sorts of ways. And this, of course, is why we have a dana economy at this centre, why we do not charge for any Buddhist event. You don't charge people to become a member, to be a member of your community. I mean, you just don't do that, do you? It's just not. Yeah, you can join our community, but it'll cost. That's not the way you do it. So if our community decides, well, we don't want to support these people, well, we'll do it in a garage. But we exist on generosity. We exist on generosity. And generosity breeds generosity. Stinginess breeds stinginess. It's a chain reaction. So at the level of the Sangha, we exist on generosity. At the level of personal relationships, the Sangha is characterized by giving gifts, even small gifts, cards, whatever, that create the bonds of friendship, and giving attention, giving time and interest, being part of each other's lives. We live in this highly individualistic world where we keep ourselves to ourselves and relate to others in very limited ways. That's not a good way for human beings to be. Not a good way to be happy. So let's be subversive and break out of our little nuclear worlds and sort of create something bigger than ourselves. So that's the first one, generosity. The second is priyavadita, kindly speech. Encouraging, praising, appreciating, thanking, and apologizing. Incredibly powerful effect on people. Praising and appreciating people makes people visibly grow and blossom. Again, there's a chain reaction. The more we speak kindly to each other, the more we want to do it, the more it's safe to do it, the more we can acknowledge and appreciate others. So, kindly speech and avoiding harsh speech. Avoiding words, according to the Pali Canon, that are rough, hard, hurtful, offensive to others, bordering on anger. And also, often with this kindly speech, gossip is singled out as being just crucially corrosive of Sangha. Gossip, telling here what I heard there. Gossip kills communities. it creates divisions. So we aim for speech that encourages, creates a positive atmosphere, unites. The third one is beneficial activity. Beneficial activity, helping. In a spiritual community, people help each other. Friends help each other. The best way to be a friend, to have a friend, is to be a friend. You start by giving beneficial activity. In practical ways, helping people move house, do tasks, babysitting, whatever, it creates bonds of mutual friendship. It creates community. And traditionally, it's said that the best beneficial activity is to teach the Dharma. The best way to help people, if we can do it effectively, is to pass on a spiritual vision which allows people to be happy whatever their material circumstances. Okay, and then the last one, samanatata. Samanatata, meaning sameness, usually translated as exemplification. We need to walk our talk. Better than 100 Dharma talks it is to see someone who lives and acts according to the Dharma, so says the Pali Canon. So all the talk in the world will not do any good if we don't live it. Nobody takes any notice. Being an example is the best way to get it through, basically. So we need to walk our talk as well as talking it. Another translation, though, is something like treating others as yourself. A bit of a high aspiration, but at our level, understanding that we are, in a sense, the same. You know, we've all got flaws, so let's not be so critical of others. We see that we are a bit like that too, so we forgive. Forgiveness. We recognize that we too get it wrong. We forgive others when they get it wrong. We make allowances. We don't moan and criticize. We let the lapses go and relate to what's best in other people. And maybe sometimes we even put our own desires aside and do what other people want rather than ourselves. So, okay, that's the Sahamgra Vastus: generosity, kindly speech, beneficial activity, and either exemplification or putting others on an equal status with ourselves. And building Sangha by using those, building Sangha, creating a community, creating a Buddha field by practicing those Samgraha Vastus, that is the ethos of this centre. That is the overriding ethos of this centre. It's the model that guides everything we do, or we try to make it the model that guides everything we do. We're trying to create a spiritual community where we can all grow and flourish, because without such, none of us grow and flourish. And we're trying to do it by practicing generosity, kindly speech, beneficial activity, exemplification. But, okay, I mean, I used that term recently in a meeting of Buddhists. I said, oh, we're trying to create Sangha, that's the overall goal. And people said, poo-poo. And the reason they said that is because all too often that can sound like what we're trying to do is just create a social group. And we're not just trying to create any old community. We're trying to create a Sangha, a spiritual community, a community where people are growing and developing. I said earlier that what we build is we build a better being in ourselves, and we come together with others to create the sort of mini world in which that can happen. As well as creating a community, we need to be practicing to develop ourselves, to grow as individuals. The two go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other, only to the extent that we become a bit wiser, a bit more emotionally positive, more in contact with something higher than our little egos. Only to that extent can we be, as it were, bricks in the Buddha field, in the Buddha land. Without the Buddha field, we can't get far in our quest to become wiser, more emotionally alive, and more in touch with something. The Buddha field is the field in which that something arises. An essential part of the way we develop ourselves is to create that Buddha field. An essential part of the way we create the Buddha field is to develop ourselves. Two go hand in hand. So in this series of talks, I'm introducing a series of talks, and in this series of talks, we're going to be talking about both those aspects, how we develop ourselves and how we come together with others to create something, create the mini Pure Land in which we can all grow. The two can't be separated. And we're going to start next week by talking about how, if we want to be part of building the Buddha land, we need to start by becoming fully human. I mean, that might sound a bit contentious, actually. We tend to think of being human as having this sort of body, but actually in Buddhism, being human is seen as a spiritual state, actually, a spiritual state that by no means all humans achieve, or not all of us all of the time. And we're going to be exploring that by, if I can find my notes, yes, what are we going to be doing? Excuse me. Yeah, so I don't know who's giving that talk. Who's giving that talk next week? You are, okay. So Moksha Tara is going to be doing that, and she's going to be using the very rich symbol of the Wheel of Life to do it. So that's the beginning of the rest of our series, moving on from there. But that's next week. And to round off this week, I'd just like to offer a few thoughts about what I've been talking about, what that might mean for our day-to-day practice. What it might mean for our day-to-day practice. All very well to hear all these high-flown words about building Buddha fields, but what does it mean? Well, firstly, I've talked about the four Samgrahavastas as a way of building Sangha, and that we could see that as being about how we behave around this environment, etc. But even if we don't spend much time around this environment, we can use those Samgrahavastas to create a better world around ourselves. We all create a world around ourselves all the time, for better or worse, by how we are, by how we behave, by how we speak, hugely, by how we relate to others. We create that world, and then we have to live in that world, even if it's unpleasant. And we can all use the Samgrahavastas to create a better world around ourselves in whatever environment we're in. Wherever we relate to people, in our family, among our friends, at work, wherever. Generosity, kindly speech, helpful activity, and thinking as much about others, or trying to think more about others and not just about ourselves. If we do those, we'll have a beneficial effect wherever we are. We'll create a little bit of a Buddha field. Some of the Buddha's influence will be manifested even there. So that's the first one. We can use the Samgrahavastas. It's a universal spiritual teaching about creating community, creating harmony. Not just about Sangha. So my second one, and this is mainly for those who are a bit more experienced, maybe, is if you're thinking, shall I go to that thing at the Buddhist Center? Shall I go? You might try not just thinking, will I learn something new? Or will I find it inspiring? You might find that if you just turn up and engage, you'll learn more and get more inspired anyway. By giving as well as getting, because giving is part of our practice. Thirdly, this is my other takeaway, if you don't, try not to see the Sangha as an optional extra. With meditation, personal practice, what's really important. Sangha isn't just a means to an end. Sangha is an end in itself. Sangha is something we create between us by the way we interact. It's something beyond any of us that we create among us. And when we do take part in creating that, everybody who takes part benefits. Everybody who takes part benefits. Taking part in that creation of Sangha is as much about transcending our limited self as any insight practice, so-called insight practice, in fact, probably more so. It's very much more real way of going beyond our limited self. And my last takeaway is you might consider that our commitment to the Sangha might be an important message, might tell us something important about how far we've progressed. So that steps forward in commitment, like becoming a mitra or training for ordination, entering ordination training, those are important steps forward in our spiritual life. They're not just about external institutions. They actually represent real steps forward because they're real steps in engagement with the Sangha. They're real steps in commitment, and the other side of commitment, the more we put in, the more we get out. So those are a few sort of takeaways, if you like. So I'd like to end this introduction to this series by building on emptiness with a quote from Shakespeare, actually. Here, he has his character, Prospero. This is from The Tempest. He has his character, Prospero, saying goodbye at the end. So the play's ending, and Prospero's saying, well, that's it. That's the end of this play. We've created this wonderful illusion. Here it comes to an end. And it's also Shakespeare saying goodbye. It's Shakespeare saying goodbye to his audience at the end of his writing career. Well, that's what I think most critics think. Note the joke about the globe, the great globe. So he says, and like the baseless fabric of this vision, that's the play, like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. Well, that's true, maybe apart from the bit about the sleep. But in the meantime, it's true, it's all going to dissolve and leave not a rack behind. But in the meantime, let's make ourselves into something worthwhile. Let's come together to make something worthwhile that's bigger than any of us. So let's build on emptiness.